So I finally played the new Wolfenstein games thanks to the Alternate History Collection, which comes with all 4 new games that Machine Games and Arcane Studios made, and I don't want to say it was a disappointment, but perhaps a little bit of a letdown, because my impression of Wolfenstein was that it was this mix of really, really good gameplay and a really good narrative set in an alternate timeline where Nazis won World War II and they have like these sci-fi elements and there's all these like sci-fi weapons and you can go to space and you dual wield guns and it's super cool. And only half of that is really correct. I really like the gameplay, I really do. The dual wielding guns is fun. The stealth and run and gun mix is also really fun. I liked sneaking around, throwing knives, taking out Nazis, taking out their legs, taking out their everything. But the story really left a lot to be wanted. I feel like the story was very lackluster in exploring the world. I felt like it very much was like any generic regime was ruling over the world, and there was a small group of resistance fighters that fought back, and I don't know, it just felt too generic. But let's just jump into the games. So we have Wolfenstein: The New Order, and in this one you play as BJ Blazkowicz. He's been the protagonist since I think like Wolfenstein 3D or something. To be fair, I don't know a lot about Wolfenstein, so maybe that didn't help me really understand the world setting. But you play as BJ Blazkowicz, who is this, as much as I hate to say it, he is just basically like an edgelord. Like, he is very much someone who monologues about death and not being able to be happy anymore, and like he just brings down the mood, and he's super edgy, and like I don't really care for him. I don't know. I mean, like, he fulfills his purpose as being, like, a giant muscular... Well, no, he's not that giant, but, like, a muscular guy that you could believably believe that he will dual-wield guns and kill Nazis. He fulfills that job. As far as, like, a interesting main character, I mean, he's as bland as they come. You might as well just... You could put literally anyone over him. The fact that he has a name is the only thing that is really interesting about him. And his name... I don't know. I mean, Blazkowicz is like, I guess he's like half Jewish, and his name is William, which I've never understood why Bill is short for William, but it is. And his middle name I think is like, this is something with a J. Obviously BJ Blazkowicz. Either way, you play as him. You are basically this like war veteran who, after an injury, you spend like 14-ish, I think it was, like 14 years as like a vegetable. And this is where the other sort of important character comes into place, which is Anya, his new like wife, sort of. Like in this game, they're more, I guess, just like lovers, and in the next games they'll be like actually together. But it felt really spontaneous, I guess is the right word. Anya doesn't really like talk. Well, she talks to you, but you don't really talk back because you're a vegetable for 14 years. And then some Nazis come and attack, and then you save her, and then suddenly, I guess, they're lovers. Like, it doesn't really flesh out that well. She sort of is just sort of like a support Blazkowicz without question kind of character, and she kind of gets a better treatment in Wolfenstein New Colossus, but we'll get to that later. Basically, New Order, you play as Blazkowicz, you take orders from this lady named Caroline, and you build a resistance only for, surprise, surprise, the Nazis to find your base, destroy it. You end up fighting this guy named Death's Head in a giant mech suit, which I thought was really cool. The boss fights in New Order are actually pretty fun. Minus this giant robot called the London Monitor, I believe it was called, something like that. That boss fight was just boring, I guess. I'm not gonna say bad, it was just boring. Like, there's so many better things that you can do. The final boss fight's fun. Blazkowicz ends up staying behind to fight Death's Head, and an explosion happens. Roll credits, next game. So, technically, in the order in which the games came, Old Blood is next, but Old Blood takes place before New Order, so it's the sequel that's a prequel. I don't know. It's okay, I guess. It very much feels like New Order 2.0. You still play as Blazkowicz, but you are infiltrating Castle Wolfenstein, and you have to track. Well, first of all, that goes wrong, but you find out that the Nazis are up to something. You have to track this archaeologist Nazi named Helga, and so you escape Castle Wolfenstein. You go to this village. You end up fighting Nazis. Surprise, surprise. There's a lot of Nazi killing. That's something I'll give Wolfenstein. There's a lot of Nazi killing, which is pretty fun. You fight your way through this village. You meet some side characters. Blah, blah, blah. And then you finally meet Helga, right? And you think, well, this can't be the end of the game. And then suddenly a zombie outbreak happens. And then you fight your way through the village again, but with a bunch of zombies. And then some zombie Nazis. And then you fight a giant mummy at the end, which was kind of like bizarre. It ends up eating Helga, so mission accomplished there. You fight the giant mummy. You get saved by your buddy from New Order, and then he goes to the airfield to basically start New Order. So I guess, okay. It's very short. It's like 6 hours. New Order was like 10-ish. They're not very long games, which is kind of odd because they are huge, and I mean huge, in file size. These things are ridiculous. But anyways, let's move on to New Colossus. New Colossus. Now look, if I had to recommend one of these games, I would recommend New Colossus. Even if you might be saying like, oh, I don't know anything about the story. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Trust me, the story is not very good. You can pretty much fill in the blanks and probably get it right. But in New Colossus, you start as Blazkowicz after the explosion, and you basically have half health, but you can have like a bunch of armor. You get into this power armor that they found in New Order, which is, I guess it's kind of cool. It also turns out Anya is pregnant. She has twin sisters, which you will play as in Youngblood, but we'll get to that. Basically, there was this Nazi lady in the first game who you messed up her jaw with a giant mech, and now she's hunting Blazkowicz and friends. And after Caroline, who was the leader of the resistance there, dies, they find out that she's actually been talking to the U.S. resistance. So they're like, hey, we should go, find them. So then you go find the resistance members in the U.S. But the whole time, so Blazkowicz is basically at death's door. This time he's fully at death's door. He's going to die because half of his guts were cut out to keep him alive or something like that. The power armor is basically the only thing keeping him alive and keeping him upright. And it turns out that in him finding this out, he just goes full edgelord and decides to avoid Anya and his 2 unborn kids. And he's just constantly being stay away, Blazkowicz. She doesn't deserve this. She deserves to have happiness. You're always gonna be sad and alone and dead. And I'm just this guy, I don't know. He sort of grows on me later on, but I'll get into that. So basically, you go meet up with the U.S. people. You meet Grace and Super Spesh, right? Grace basically becomes the new Caroline, and Blazkowicz becomes her errand boy. He literally follows her orders without ever questioning anything. He's just yeah, okay, I'll do it. Because I guess he can't think for himself. He just listens to whatever other people tell him. But I guess that's part of his whole, military background, right? And then Super Spesh is this, weird dude who believes in aliens, but surprise, surprise, it doesn't really matter because he dies. And if you dare say that you cared as Super Spesh died, you're lying or you're just super, super gullible. But either way, Blazkowicz gets captured, Super Spesh dies. And this is where I very highly recommend that you play this game. Because during the trial, Blazkowicz has this daydream, I guess you can call it daydream, of him breaking out of his restraints. And then there's the courtroom mission, which is by far one of the best arenas in these games. It is seriously the weapon variety, the cover, the mobility, it's all just a giant circle, and the enemy types, it all just works perfectly. Seriously, get it just for the courtroom level. You will not regret it if you like first person shooters. Either way, it was all a daydream, wasn't actually real. And it turns out Blazkowicz does fully get decapitated. Like he straight up gets his head cut off. But this is where the game kind of won me back a little bit because of how goofy it started going. Like this is gonna be really, really goofy. From this point onwards, this series is seriously just gonna get like, what is going on? Before Blazkowicz gets executed, you could say it's like grounded, I guess you could say, in realism or whatever you want to say. But as soon as Blazkowicz gets decapitated, they throw his head into this incinerator, right? But it turns out the resistance members had a drone that was holding a dummy head, and it grabs his real head, throws the dummy head, so then that way the incinerator, it lights up, so then that way the Nazis think, yeah, we won, we killed Blazkowicz. But then it turns out they take Blazkowicz's head and they put it in a jar and it like keeps it alive. And then they have this super soldier body that they got from the Nazis, and they're like, hey Blazkowicz, we're gonna put your head on this body. And it works. It works. And then Blazkowicz just suddenly becomes this like upbeat, chipper guy. He's all happy. He's like, I'm back in it. And then he starts loving his wife again. He's like, oh, I love you, baby. It's what is going on? And he just suddenly becomes a super chipper, like this super like hard edgelord of like, oh, I'm at death's door. Is now like, hey man, how's it going? I love all you guys. Yeah. It's like, what is going on? So either way, the rest of the game, you go to space. You end up finally getting revenge on the evil Nazi lady from the first game, kill her on live TV, and then you basically announce to the US, hey, it's time to rebel. It's time we take arms. It's time that we fight for what is right, and yada, yada, yada. So then next we have Wolfenstein Youngblood, and this one is like a huge time skip. Basically, the US is back in control of itself. No more Nazis. So you get introduced to Jesse and Zofia Blazkowicz, which are the twin daughters of Blazkowicz, Papa Blazkowicz, I guess you can call him now. And so coming into this one, because this is the one that I think the new fan base has been very vocal about it not being very good. And I want to say Youngblood is bad. It isn't as bad as everyone makes it out to seem. It's not great. It's okay, I guess, if you had to put it. The problem is really on the twins. The twins are just like, they're just what people interpret siblings as. Like, sure, they're kind of cringy at times, but comparing them to Papa Blazkowicz, I don't see them as a step down. They're about equal level. Blazkowicz himself was always just a nothing of a character, I guess. Jesse and Zofia, the twins, they at least try. I don't know. Better than nothing, I guess. Either way, you're the twins and you have to find Papa Blazkowicz, and it turns out that he's in Paris looking for something called the God Key. And I see that the different mission structure, basically, you have like hub worlds and you have like light RPG elements where you have ability points and you have abilities and you have a level and XP and all this. And yeah, it's never been in the other three Wolfenstein games. The other three Wolfenstein games had these perks where like if you killed enemies a certain way, you got perks, which was like, okay, I guess. The RPG elements were kind of tedious, I guess you could say. The grind for leveling up wasn't anything crazy. I actually ended up beating the game in like, I want to say like 10 hours. All these games are pretty short. I would say do not expect like 20 hours. They're basically like 10 hours, except for Old Blood. Old Blood is very much like 6 hours. Either way, you fight your way through Paris. You finally meet Papa Blazkowicz. And it all sort of has like a happy ending. Like you find Papa Blazkowicz, you kill the bad guys. They're like, ah ha ha, you kids, ah ha ha, you're really your father's daughters. And it's just like, what was that? It just ends in like a really weird, like, we're gonna hold off Paris while you go exploring, Dad. And that's really it. Like, there's not really much to the story in like any of these games. They're all pretty generic in terms of like a resistance group fighting a regime. So I guess my expectations weren't necessarily met. They're not really these finely crafted narratives that I was like waiting for, like, oh, they're really going to explore an alternate timeline where the Nazis win. It's not really explored that well. It just kind of meanders around until the end, where they're like, oh, we have to set up another game, so let's actually do some story for once. I would say these games are just like Nazi shooting galleries, which is fun. The gameplay is really fun, which is why if you're someone who favors gameplay over cutscenes, I would say definitely pick up the alternate history collection. Skip the cutscenes because they can be pretty long and pretty dragged out. Just enjoy the Nazi shooting. And in terms of order from worst to best, here's how my order goes. You might not agree with it, but you have New Order, which is the worst. You have Old Blood, Young Blood, and New Colossus, which I say is the absolute best. Pick up New Colossus, even if you don't want to pick up all the 4 games. At least pick up New Colossus, which is why I'm willing to say Wolfenstein New Colossus is Rambling Brother approved.